Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit Ch.5 called Human Rights Chapter 5, written by puzzle-headed Charged War. The conclusion of the Third Cold War, the Commandant read, marked the dawn of the cooperative era, the first period in human history wherein the United Nations held the role of supreme governing body. The fantastic stakes of the Dragzoon colony crisis finally brought home the humanity to the truth of relationship with itself. In the First Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union both blinked at the prospect of nuclear annihilation, it learned that it was not insane. In the Second Cold War, wherein the Eastern Prosperity Bloc acknowledged the importance of FDL freedom and the centralized control, it learned that it was not limited. And after the conclusion of the most dramatic mass destruction standoff yet seen in this galaxy, humanity learned that it was no longer its own enemy. Though conflicts would and do still persist, the prevailing belief from the ancient crisis of Earth is that tunnel networks and Kuiper Belt to the floating rangelands of the Orion Nebula is that humanity has answered one of its oldest questions. It would not destroy itself. The Commandant stopped reading, glowing eyes dimming as he thought. He could almost draw a parallel between the events of the coming Zara and Codebringer in both cases, a cataclysmic event that made populations receptive to ideas that they had previously shunned, and in both cases a new paradigm became entrenched. However, the Zalask had been almost completely wiped out by the wasting plague before accepting Zara's teachings. For the humans, merely the close approach of the spectre with such a calamity was able to compel them to modify their behavior. It seems that they are a lot more adaptable than us. The Zalask knew that already. Attempting to fight the humans was like trying to wrestle the mud snakes that thrived in the sulphurous runoff of the homeworld's island volcanoes. No matter how you grasped the beast, it still twisted itself free to bite you from a new direction. He was quite certain that he was being bitten now, though he had nothing to support his suspicion. It was simply an old instinct, long dormant and at the back of his mind, that woke up with whispered danger every time he looked at his new prisoners. He had made it his mission to read all of the human history. It was why he had obtained this textbook and had come to the conclusion that his prisoners must be planning to escape. How? He had no idea. The very thought of beings rationally, logically, and methodically planning an act of madness was as far as he could stretch his mind to compass. Contemplation of such mechanics of the process was utterly beyond him. Perhaps you will have to take a page out of the human's data file and adapt. It was an unsettling thought, but nevertheless it appealed to him. Every soldier knew the value of surprise, so he returned to his reading. The ensuing century of expansion was the most peaceful and prosperous ever enjoyed over the troubled species. Unprecedented levels of international cooperation, cross-cultural interaction, and mutual willingness for compromise became the norm. As humanity expanded through the stars, the reasons for this fundamental shift of manifold and hotly debated, but many scholars agree that amongst them was the presence of the safety valve of the malcontents and misfits who could now pack up and strike out a truly limitless frontier, where they would be free to seek and find. Additionally, the necessary give and take of the assistance required by the infinite and indiscriminate hazards of space worked to break down the barriers of pride and build trust. Finally, it was many believed that humanity was simply ready for such a mentality and such a society. It has been said that the arc of human history, though long, bends towards justice, the final acceptance of sentient as the ultimate complexification, instead of any of the petty categorizations man has created to help structure his world, may be considered proof. So this is what the Sorensen had been talking about. His eyes brightened again as he focused out of the window, the prisoners outside engaging in one of their mock wars. He found it almost sacrilegious that shamed should partake in such activities, which were reserved for warriors. The knowledge that the prisoners were regarded themselves as soldiers despite their captivity was barely any help in accepting it, but he had brought himself to allow it. Except that rock-hitting exercise called baseball, that had been a rebellion. He took heart to the fact that he had successfully put down the first uprising, hoping that perhaps the humans would realize the true hopelessness of their situation and abandon whatever fruitless designs that they were fomenting. But he doubted it. He caught sight of Sorensen, a short female with whom, since she was the ranking officer, he interacted the most. She was leaning on the shade cast by Barracks No. 2, watching the mock war. Occasionally she shouted encouragement or direction, but she seemed much more detached than an officer should be, almost as if she thought that they were playing a game. It was only one of Sorensen's many eccentricities. She claimed humans did not go insane in captivity, but the Commandant privately wondered if they weren't all insane to begin with. This one especially. The file of the SSs had amassed on her was, impressive. Known to be what the humans called a sharpshooter, a diminutive captain had been a fearsome component of the escort in the darkness-cursed Enterprise. She had typically held her ship back from the opponents, cajoling them into overextending, and then picking them off with extremely accurate long-range fire. The humans utilized the projectile weapons that were so obsessed with to do even this, and some, like Sorensen, employed ammunition fitted with thermonuclear impact warheads. The Claws of Valor was far from the only warship the Houston had detonated. The Commandant couldn't decide how he felt about the tactic. Certainly it was effective, and it permitted the humans to compete with ships many times their superiors in tonnage and firepower, as they exploited their own smaller size and superior maneuverability to evade destruction until they could take their shot at the opponent's reactor. Humans were all well versed in what they called armed penetration and appallingly familiar with a wide array of tricks that initiate nuclear chain reactions. The file even noted that Sorensen had co-authored a paper on a naval journal shortly before the war, detailing the results of a study she had helped conduct on the use of exotic catalysts to propagate fission through non-critical materials. The blasphemous of the humans were legion, and we cannot defeat them. The Commandant knew that he should purge himself at this thought, knew that it was further evidence of the deviant thinking that he'd landed him, a competent, healthy officer, in command of a POW camp, while his race waged war against their very survival. Yet, every day it became more difficult to care. He had seen what the deviant thinking could do in the hands of humans, and, he was realizing something in him didn't want to be cleansed. Something in him luxuriated in the stretch of sending thoughts where he had never dared before. The Commandant had not yet learned the words of the sensation, but a human would have told him the ways of enjoying the first taste of freedom. And there was the one desperately urgent matter that could only be considered a code-breaking thinking. Sorensen was correct when she had said that the Zelask were losing the war, and recently the humans had staged a number of successful ambushes, baffling the horrified Zelask, who had no idea how the humans had known to be there. Grave as these costly developments were, the diplomatic situation was still more dire. The Zelask were an elder to the humans. They were superior, but they were not as old as to command permanent respect. The galactic status depended heavily on their military prowess and the associated culture of discipline. And now their position as the warriors of the galaxy was under a serious threat by the youngest contended species. Even if the Zelask were to triumph, their reputation would still have taken a severe blow from having such difficulty. What they needed was to end the war quickly and dramatically as possible, to give the galaxy something to make them forget that the mighty Zelask was currently in retreat. If he was being honest, it was impossible that that could be accomplished militarily. Sorensen had said it herself, the humans would never surrender. The species had looked into the void many times before. Threats merely motivated them. And they were angry. An angry human was an irrational one, code-breaking one. The humans had to sign of a convention against torture that meant that they frequently let go of the law and duty and other higher elements Sorensen claimed that they struggled to hold to and embrace the other half of their capacity. That thought made him shudder. But the humans would have to be brought to an agreement somehow, and Sorensen had said that they would be willing to consider an armistice, but they would lay the root of the problem. The humans would never concede to terms that compromised their rights, and the Zelask could not offer terms that diminished their already damaged prestige. Just a little problem, and he had no idea of how to solve it. He had no idea how to prevent his people's destruction. He knew that was what it would come to. The Zalask did not surrender. If the humans forced them into a position of dishonor, they would purge themselves. There was a sort of perverse justice to that, he reflected. Not so very long ago, there had been voices in high command seeking of how it might be acceptable of necessity, though the tragic one, to be sure, to exterminate the humans if they refused to be brought into civilization. Now it was the Zalask who faced extinction. And it is we who are uncivilized. To the darkness, the commandant cursed. Bursting from his seat, he stopped himself from pacing, commanded his tail to still as his two hearts to slow. He stared balefully out the window at the humans he supposedly contained. He didn't know what they were up to, but he was certain that he had no more control over them than he did over the wind. Dear Zia, we're watchers over our homeworld Zelaya. How do I save my people? He continued to watch his prisoners. Evidently, they were not running the drill to the captain's satisfaction, because she had joined in. She had the ball. What is it supposed to simulate? The commandant didn't know, and was dodging through the mad scramble towards the other two objectives, established at either end of the field. She was not the fastest, and certainly not the strongest, but she twisted and danced and kept running, finally breaking free and charging for it was either to try or a touchdown or a goal. He couldn't not remember. And she bounced up, grinned, and handed the ball off, and went back to her seat in the shade, calling encouragements to the one side and derision to the other, which they answered with a storm of scorn. This is a game. They do this for fun. Of course they did. The commandant turned from the window, feeling helpless, hating himself. He wished he knew what to do. The code was supposed to tell him, but, he could hardly bring himself to even think it. The code is wrong. And his Zalask who had thought that was supposed to commit suicide to prevent their contagion from infecting others. The idea of doing so never even occurred to the commandant. He was too busy trying to imagine how a human would react to his circumstances. What would the race of capacity do? Was there a way he could, and what was the phrase, appeal to better angels of their nature? Was there a way to peace? The visitors of high command were coming to inspect the camp and interview the prisoners in less than a half period. Officially, they were demonstrating the mercy of the Canary, were forever nagging them to show. Unofficially, the commandant knew they were sounding out how to make their proposal to the humans. The commandant's ruby eyes dimmed again as the rapidity of his thoughts increased. One of the visitors was the overlord Zematrand, a former infantry commander. He had a greater respect for life than the others, having destroyed so much of it in his younger years. He was an iconoclastic at Zalask and wherever permitted to be, ferociously committed to honor and impatient with politics. The public admired him and the army adored him. If any Zalask could be brought to see the value in these humans and futility of continuing to fight them, as was this commandant, it would be drowned. Unfortunately, he was accompanied by over-speaker DrakeBear, a career politician who had been on the more vocal supporters of total suppression of humanity. He would never be convinced. But perhaps he can be coerced. The commandant had spent too much time with the humans. Thoughts of treason barely troubled him. They were almost pleasant. They felt warm, vital, powerful, curled in his chest like living things, glowing like talismans. It was almost intoxicating. I must speak with Sorensen. If I am to succeed, she must act as a human as possible, and as unlike a human as possible. This contradiction made him slip his tail and the Zalask equivalent of a grin. He was beginning to think like one of them. He left his office and stepped outside. The game was still going strong, the players now egged on by the raucously and various supporters. Sorensen was yelling right along with them, something about there having been 5 downs instead of the allotted 4. A few prisoners caught sight of the commandant and abruptly fell quiet. The silence spread quickly to the rowdy assembly, and it was now still as a grave. Sorensen was studiously staring at the dirt. "Captain Sorensen," the commandant began quietly, voice still carrying clearly, "if I could speak with you for a moment in my office." "Yes, of course, commandant," she replied, looking up. Even after spending so much time with him, he still found the lightless human eyes deeply unsettling. Picture books given to hatchlings to educate them of the necessity of war exaggerated the effect, giving humans 2 solid black sockets. They were all shown with saliva dripping from the hideously disproportionate teeth, but the Commandant had never reacted to the human customer smiling the way that others did. On them, it really did look friendly. "What's the matter, Commandant?" Sorensen asked, meeting his now brightly glowing garnet eyes with his dark, unchanging blue ones. "There's a matter I wish to discuss with you," the Commandant said blandly, walking around his desk to take his seat again. Only once he was properly situated did he look up, the height disparity causing his eyes to be almost exactly level with the humans. "In a few days, members of the High Command will make the visit I warned you of. I now feel that I must give you more information. Of the 2 coming, one is, what is your expression? A hack. The other, however, we may be able to convince. I apologize. I'm having trouble understanding you." From the look on the human was giving him, she clearly thought she was translating wrong, or perhaps hallucinating. "No, you are not," the Commandant replied, tone brooking no argument. "You heard me. I stated that a member of the High Command is unworthy of the scales at his back, and that we, you and me, human, must work together to convince the other." Human's mouth was hanging open again. "Convince him of what?" She pulled herself back together. "Convince him that, first, you humans are capable of negotiating with another species. Second, that you are willing to cease hostilities. Third, to offer you an armistice instead of demanding your surrender." The human stared, then spoke. "Why?" she asked. "Why in God's name would you want to help us?" The Commandant hissed in impatience. "Do you not recall our previous conversations? I am aware that your military will eventually defeat mine, and if we are defeated, we are dishonored. We are to choose death before dishonor. Do you understand?" The human nodded slowly. Eyes had watched thousands die going wide as she contemplated the voluntary extermination of billions. "I must save my species from this, and you could spare your species further casualties. We both have something to gain. We must work together." The Commandant restrained himself from standing. He remained seated, eyes level with the humans, confronting the alien as an equal. "If our races are to coexist, it must first be demonstrated to them that such a thing is possible. That task falls to us." The human's eyes narrowed as she weighed the Commandant's offer. Not a minute went by before she replied. "Very well," she said, extending one stubby, unclawed hand across the desk toward him. Recognizing the gesture as one that he'd studied, the Commandant reached forward as well. The enemies shook hands. The Commandant's eyes flared to fever bright. "There, now you should know that no human doubt my intentions. I've sacrificed my honor." He did not allow his voice to break. Sorensen almost looked like she was smirking. "What in the galaxy could you be smiling at?" the Commandant snapped, nerves finally beginning to fray. Sorensen's smirk widened into a grin. "Commandant, do you think humans have honor?" He paused. "Because in my opinion, the code of the Zalask is vanity, compromising others for the sake of yourself. Honor is compromising yourself for the sake of others." The human regarded him soberly. "Commandant, I'm assured of your intentions because you have showed honor." The Commandant's eyes dimmed at the steady glow. The Zalask had been a mere 3 periods ago would have been appalled by such a thing. The Zalask, he was now, understood it. So there was hope. There was hope that we can change. There was hope that we can be human too. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.